Welcome to Watershed Chats, presented by the Water People podcast in collaboration with Patagonia. Watershed moments are traditionally understood as a division or distinction between two phases. They can be turning points that define our shared history. Here, we sit down with experts and those having a go at building and dreaming new ways into fruition for a healthy and habitable future on planet Ocean. Our podcast comes to you from the coastal land and waters of both the Bundjalung and Kabi Kabi nations. We'd like to acknowledge these traditional custodians and pay respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. We'd also like to extend that respect to all First Nations people this podcast ripples out toward. Josh and Kyle Slabb are Bundjalung men who live, fish, surf, and raise their families near the fabled sand-bottom point break of Fingal Head on the east coast of Australia, where their ancestors have thrived for tens of thousands of years. The Slabbs are a renowned and respected family among coastal communities all over Australia for their water prowess, cultural integrity, and willingness to share Indigenous ways of thinking and relating through their cultural education organisation, Banaam, which works to empower all Australians through cultural intelligence. Banaam teaches businesses, organizations, and communities how to apply Indigenous principles of relationship building, communication, mutual responsibility, and non-hierarchical management structures. Josh Slabb became the first Indigenous Marine Park Ranger in New South Wales in 2009. He's also known for spending time in heavy Hawaiian water with big wave surfers like Makua Rothman and the Keilana family. Big brother Kyle, who we hear from first, is also a noted waterman and craftsman, known for shaping traditional canoes. He's worked in cultural consultancy and education for more than 20 years.
What is a focal point for you guys when you think of a problem in the world that you're trying to fix or an imbalance that you're trying to balance out?
Yeah, well, a focal point for us and a focal point of Banaam is that we really try and highlight cultural systems and cultural frameworks that have come from our old people, and it's a question that the old people asked us many years ago. It's very important who we were 200 years ago, but they asked us a question and said, who will we be in another 200 years? And so really set us on the path and set Banaam on the trajectory to really hone in on try and answer that question. And it became very, very apparent to us that we needed to really focus in on who we are and who we were and who we're going to be. And so it's really important, and that's something that has become very well received in our own community. Is we give people cultural identity and enable them to understand some of the cultural education that is their right, but also we can share that. The old people told us to share that with the broader community as well, and so that's something we're privileged to do. And one of the things in this country, and we're very fortunate to have a lot of old people that are connected to this country around us with their wisdom and with their knowledge. You know, we're able to share some of the best practice living with country and living on country in this place, and that's a real privilege for us, and it's an honour to share that with people that want to listen. So really what we share is just enable people through cultural frameworks and cultural systems, and some of those cultural frameworks and systems have been in operation for 60,000 years plus in this very country that we're operating in today, and those systems are still relevant and they're still very apparent for today's society. And if we can get people to tune into that, connect with that, then it's not only good for people, but it's good for the land, it's good for country as well. And we see that not only in our community but across many communities, people that are going back to traditional, I guess, not only traditional ways but focusing in on transposing cultural systems into modern context. You see really good results, positive stuff in communities. So.
I think the first thing that I see as a relevant application for broader community and society is our central reference point as Aboriginal people is the land, and everything else comes out of the land. So it's essential to have a right relationship to land and understand your relationship to the earth, really. And everything else comes out of that and comes from that. Who we are and how we live with the land, and it has to come from an understanding of who or what is the land. And in our language, you say ngayo if we're just talking about the ground, or here on where I sit near on the beach. But the buyum gully is the sand, the beach. But when we talk about the land as an entity, as a living entity, we say jagun. And jagun is talking about all of the land as a living entity, and what is your relationship to that land? In your understanding of the world, do you see the earth as a commodity or a resource, or do you see it as an entity? It's an entity that you can have a relationship in. For a lot of First Nations people around the globe, it's a consistent system or framework for us that the land is our mother, and we all have a sky story, or there's a land entity and a sky entity in some form, takes all different forms for all different people. And we understand that we carry both those stories as people. And so when you see the land like that and you understand that you're part of it and it's part of you and you carry that story, you have a bit of a different perspective if you feel separated from that.
You were just touching on the fact that we're here on this beach, and where is this? Because people listening are probably wondering, wow, this sounds good. And I was sitting with the fellas here on a beach and gone fishing and watching the sun go down, the moon go to the west. Where are we?
Yeah, so this place where we come from is what we call, in our language, we call it Buningba, and Buningba is the place of the echidna. And to the south of the beach here, we can see that rock formation that sticks out into the sea there, and that, for us, that represents the Buning in our language. That's the echidna. And there's a cultural story of this landscape, how that echidna come to be there. Yeah, this is home for us and has been for a long time. Our people here, we're part of the Bundjalung, our brothers and sisters from Bundjalung, but we are the Gudjingbara here on that occupy this part of the coast.
I really enjoyed when we were talking earlier today about sort of lineages or the past that has led us to this moment now, and the learnings we can gain from our elders. Is that something that's difficult to explain or describe to people when you're doing the work with Banaam, with corporate groups or people who are really fresh to any Indigenous knowledge? Is it hard to try and translate the depth or even the ideas of deep time to modern minds?
Yeah, and even the idea of cycles, cyclical time as opposed to lineal time. So everything cycles and it always comes around, and we have different words in language for that. Guriabu is a long time, the long cycle. Ngubua is the short cycle. And so it's just scales of cycles of time. And sometimes I think, a lot of people, they don't have knowledge of their history of their story, and I think some people hearing the story that we have here in this country, this land that we're on, it's our grandmother's country, and our great-great-grandmother lived in a humpy across the road from where we live today, so our old people have been here for, we don't know how far back, but we know our ancestors are from here. But, a lot of people know the story of Bundjalung. We actually came from the sea, so in our beginnings. So there's always a story and a connection. I always think it's important to have a bit of understanding of your story, because where your story comes from and how you carry those stories, they all become part of you. We're all an accumulation of our stories, and we've heard people talk about of going back to look at their story again, like, where do I actually come from, and who am I, and where, that's it's been interesting to hear a lot of people after hearing some of the local Aboriginal people's stories of how they connect back to their ancestors in these places here. going back and looking for the ancestors, because everybody comes from somewhere, and everybody connects to some land, and that's unless you're a spaceman or Elon Musk is your best mate, and you're going to get a free ticket, but you're going to live every day of your life on the earth, and so understanding your connection to that. Yes.
And I guess for the listeners out there, this place that we're talking about and the beach that we're sitting on is in northern New South Wales, and it's Fingal Head. This is a piece of paradise that people are slowly discovering.
But there's heaps of sharks here, and the locals are.
The locals are rough.
Yeah.
The waves aren't. There's not much fish left either.
Yeah, Drambar snapper's like 10 minutes up the road, way better.
Lots of new friends to meet and people to share the waves with.
Good coffee,
Well, I know for me over the last period of time with talking with you, Josh, about the Banaam and Gogon relationship has been something that's just through you, sharing a little bit about that with me. For me, going back home and having even just friendships and family relationships that I've had for a long time, I'm seeing them in a new way now.
Yeah.
And it's simple but really powerful to just have a new understanding that feels kind of deeply right and deeply respectful. And so I was wondering if you'd be up for sharing what that dynamic is.
Look, it's something that we live our lives by as Aboriginal people. It's here we in this country we call it Banaam and Gogon, and for us it represents the two halves of a relationship, and our communities operate by it. Our family units and everything we do is in relationship. Here we're on the beach. This beach is in relationship with that ocean. There's two halves. Everything is in relationship, and for us, it's something we share that knowledge around Banaam and Gogon with the broader public, because it's such an empowering thing, and like you say, it gives you a very fresh perspective on relationship. And one of the things that Banaam does is that's one thing we focus heavily on with our. With people we work with and businesses we work with. It's about improving that relationship between non-Indigenous Australia and Indigenous Australia, and that's we want to see that relationship proved in years to come. So one of the heavy things we focus on is that principle of Banaam and Gogon, and it's a very simple relationship principle, and it's simply in two halves. And Gogon, in our language, they have a cultural role, and they have a cultural responsibility, and somebody who's Gogon in our community carries knowledge for a certain thing, and Banaam, he's wherever you have a Gogon, you have a Banaam as well. And Banaam's job, it's very simple. Their cultural role is to support Gogon in everything they do, and Gogon's cultural role is to look after or help provide for everything that Banaam needs. So it's a very, very simple relationship, but it's very, very effective if you get it right. And it's something it's innate with our community. It's innate with Aboriginal people that we always think in the collective. We always think of as community. We always think in family. It's never an individual pursuit, and so we live our lives in this dynamic of Banaam and Gogon. And it's something we don't talk about. We don't have to stop and think about it, but we just practice it, and it comes very, very natural for us. But the application of Banaam and Gogon fits in so many places, and it actually comes from the land. You see it in nature. Everything's in relationship, and so you can find a lot of different application. Like you mentioned, you find it in your friends' relationships. You find it in your family. You find it everywhere, and the beauty of it is that it's very dynamic, and it's never fixed as well. So in a traditional context, how would it work is if Gogon went fishing yesterday and broke his fishing spear, but today he wants to go fishing, he might take his Banaam's fishing spear and Banaam would let him do that. And then Gogon would go fishing, but he'd know full well that his Banaam didn't have a fishing spear to catch fish today. So he'd catch enough fish, collect enough for his family, but also he'd provide Banaam with the fish that he needed when he returns the spear. And so that's in a traditional setting, it might work a bit like that, but in today's modern context, you can find applications that work throughout all aspects of our lives. And it's something very simple but very powerful if you get it right, and it does give you that refreshing, perspective on relationships. And Kyle might shed a little bit more on Banaam and Gogon and the applications.
Really gives we talk about reciprocal relationships and equality they're words that we hear all the time, especially lately, about equality and inclusion and those kind of things. We talk about those, but in a society that is based, functions on a hierarchical structure, how do you create equality within a hierarchy? And so the power of Banaam and Gogon, that kind of system, is that it can create a system where people can express and contribute to their community whatever they have within their capacity, but they don't have to do it within a hierarchical structure. They're not forced into that. We always talk about, just what comes to mind, people talk about the battle of the sexes and this kind of thing, where there's been a lot of focus on empowering women in the last couple of decades, and which has been a great thing in that, but how do we stop that from becoming another battle? If you empower one or you empower another one, or it could be anything, how do you create equality within hierarchy? And so that's the real power of cultural systems, when you understand that people we use terms like everybody has value as an individual, but the activation of that value and belonging is in the collective. It's not as an individual. It's within a collective, and none of us are living. Or maybe some people are. They're living completely on their own. But even those people that lives by themselves, up in a cave and be a monk, still have to be in relationship to the earth. So we're always in relationship, and how do we frame that?
Which is a radically different view to what we see just over that hill there, for example, where it's every man and woman and child for themselves, and the hero is the hero. It's always a single individual, Superman, Batman, Spider-Man type of idea of overcoming challenge. It's done on your own and all of that, which makes this such a radical idea. Not even radical, the radical system that has been functioning and is so applicable and so necessary right now, when we see so many systems crumbling. We're in the middle of a very strange year where people are locked down, and unfortunately lots of people are sick and or suffering in different ways. We're looking at things like the summer that we just went through, and fires of an unprecedented level, and lots of things that are pretty broken, that really do need a radical rethink. And what you're sharing feels like a radical rethink to me, for a lot of us. And is it something that when you do your courses and you're sharing with people, are there common hurdles for people when you've shared this?
I think there's for most people, no one's really offered an alternative. There has been alternative communities and intentional communities and collectives that have probably been pursuing this community kind of and a collective kind of lifestyle for a long time, but whether they had the framework to support that or the systems to support it, I don't know. But most people want to live in the society that we live in, and there's a lot of things that we like about who we are and where we are today. But no one's offering an alternative within that space and within this society. This is something that you don't have to go and get a 4-year degree to do this. You can go home and practice it right now. We can practice it right here. Like, what knowledge do we carry, and and who has knowledge for what? What decision or what's the context that we're in, and we just apply the system. And that system is it's beneficial for everyone. There's two principles that really make our cultural systems work, and in language we talk about garama, and Ngimblin means respect and contribution. So there, in any relationship, and even in a Banaam Gogon relationship, respect has to flow both ways, has to be balanced, and contribution has to flow both ways. So you can be very respectful in a relationship but not make any contribution, or you can make a lot of contribution and not have respect. So those two principles are important in any relationship, and you have to make sure they're balanced. And if we always, that's how we check. We check our relationships and we check ourselves. If something's not sitting right or something's not feeling right, is respect flowing both ways here? Is contribution flowing both ways here? And everyone can only contribute what they can carry and what they carry. So people aren't expecting. We talk about a song that we sing in language, one of our yawas, our corroboree, and it talks about now when Yelgan Gargiwala, when the sun's going down, and it sings out to all the people, come back from whatever you've been doing and collect the firewood for the night. And it calls everyone in, and old people, men and women, little people. A strong man can pick up a big log and contribute that to the fire. A little kid can pick up a stick and contribute that. So you only contribute what you can and what you carry, but it has to be a principle that everybody respects one another, everybody contributes. Yeah.
And one of the most beneficial things of Banaam and Gogon and that relationship is that everybody is Gogon for something at times, and everybody is Banaam for something at times. And so, when you realise that there's knowledge that I carry, and it essentially becomes a knowledge management system then, because everybody carries their knowledge for what they're carrying, and everybody can contribute their support when they can. So it's to look at relationships and say when can I support, and when do I be Gogon, or when do I be Banaam is very beneficial as well.
You also mentioned something earlier that I found really relatable as a water person, and that's the sitting and listening practice, and the importance of that.
Yeah, that's something we practice a lot here in community, and we have done since the old people always tell us. There's two things they tell us to always remember. We say binango and nyalangi. Binango is make sure you're always listening, and nyalangi is make sure you're always watching or you're always seeing. And that's they're two very important things, and still it's a practice that we do at every stage in our lives, particularly when you're living on country and you're out on country. That's when the old people would say it a lot, is to be always watching, always listening, not only to what's going on with us and people, but what's going on with country too. So because country it speaks for itself. The Jagun speaks for itself and has a language of its own. And when you're Binango and Nyalangi, when you listen and watch, you begin to learn. You learn that language. And we just had a little time fishing, and it was still daytime, but we knew the fish were here somewhere because of where the gibbon was, where the moon was situated. So if you watch and listen enough, the language is speaking all the time. And that's something that's always repeated, and I guess a daily practice for us, Binango and Nyalangi.
Do you feel that that's something accessible for people who aren't in coastal zones like this, where it is so arresting? We've got waves, we've got the interplay between land and ocean, and all of these things happening that are so easily arresting of our attention, but what happens if you live in the big smoke? Like, how would you do that and, I guess, have a type of balance or health in a space like that?
I think any space, where there's life, it's sometimes hard to find and see, but what's been something that's really impacted me lately is just the plants, you go through cities and then look in the parks and, the plants, you find things. I see flowers growing through the footpath and things growing onto the side of the road, but just the seasonal changes that happen through that, like the observations. I remember we were doing a session up in Brisbane, and we were in I think we were in a government building and on the 40-something floor, and I heard this sound and I knew straight away the sound because I've heard it out in the mountains, and it was, I said, that's peregrine falcon. And someone said, well, what will one of them be doing here? And someone came and said, oh, yeah, they nest on the top of this building, And so even just the sounds of what you're hearing and what's there, and it amazes me how not only have people moved into the cities, but so has nature. How do those birds find enough food? I suppose they're just eating all the pigeons. But, they're just, there's something there, and there's always, if you watch enough and you see enough, it's always there, eh?
Yeah, and then it also amazes me. Like, I got some friends and people that live in cities, and that sometimes that's a foreign language to me, coming from a little coastal community with not much going on except nature. Some of the things that the people that live in cities tune into, is very different. It's sort of, cities I have a fascination, like they have a language of their own. There's so much movement and so much hustle and bustle, but I seem to be the one that's always confused there, and the others, some of my friends in that, they can feel that rhythm and they flow in that rhythm pretty good, whereas sometimes it's a little off-putting to me, but you always see, you can see those big systems though, like even, like the cities around here, I guess you can always see the clouds, you can always, the clouds have a language, they speak, they tell you what's going on pretty clearly, and, depending on the patterns of the clouds and which way they're moving, the wind, if people even just take notice, when the wind blows from a certain way, when it blows back the other way, it actually, the air feels very different, if the wind's blowing from the south versus it's coming from the north. So, it's even that feeling is very different in the air. And that's something, people can feel that no matter where they are.
Yeah, I think you can always listen and, those principles for me, we practice them every day here on country, and it's been real good this last 6 months for us to be back on country where in that kind of context which is familiar to us. But when I walk into a meeting in a corporate boardroom, the first thing I do when I walk into that meeting, Bundjalung, I'll make sure I listen and I'll make sure I see what's really happening. And so it even helps me in every context. How do you perceive what's going on around you in the world?
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting thing. But one of the things for me, growing up in an Aboriginal community, a small Aboriginal community, and then going to engage with the world, like Josh said, I couldn't make sense of what people were doing and why they were doing it. And when you really ask, I don't know, I've never sat down in the street in a city and asked people, why are you here and why are you doing this? And I wonder if people in cities do stop and ask themselves, why am I here and why am I doing this? You jump on this bus and jump on this train and get to this place and do this job and come back, why is it? And I remember going with my dad, I think I was around about 18 or something, and I remember going with him to Sydney, and first time I've been in the city at Sydney, and we went and visited some of the mob that live in the urban Aboriginal communities in the hearts of our cities, and we're down in Redfern and we're visiting some mob, and we walked out, and I remember thinking to myself, if I got born here, when I was old enough to put a backpack on, I'd walk straight out of the city and keep walking, like you know. But that was only my perspective. I had no, you know, as a young fellow growing up in a small Aboriginal community on the beach, like for me, I just couldn't make sense of why people would live like that. And I think as a society, we've inherited a lot of things from past cultural systems that even the West has. Everybody has cultural inherent systems that we carry into the present and we take into the future. And you know, I had a yarn with a good mate a while ago about, you know, when was the times that people moved into certain kind of habitations, and who decided that you know, you should live in the one place all year. What forced that? You know, what was that when agriculture came and people didn't have to be nomadic, or was it when people found a cave and the resources were enough to support people living in that place? And you know, our units and these condos and that are they just modern day caves and people just live together for protection, and that's where the resources are, you know. So what is it about who people are and where we've come from it determines what we accept as living today, like, and a lifestyle that we seek. One of the things that we talked about was our grandmother, or our great grandmother, used to come here to visit our grandmother, and she never would stay in the house. She'd always sleep in a camp out in the bush. And it rained one day, and our dad was a bit concerned about his grandmother. Oh, she'd be getting rained on out in her camp, and she'd actually gone under the front of the house in the sand out of the rain, and but she didn't go in the house. And so it's interesting to think for our old people, being out and in touch with the land, being able to observe what's going on is really important. But you know, if you came from, you know, Europe in the middle of winter, you'd want to have some kind of shelter, because so I think the environment has really determined who we are and how we live in the past. But then people have carried those kind of principles and ideas and concepts around habitation to other places, where living inside of giant brick house in this kind of country is pretty hard. But,
talk about it in like the last few seasons. You think about the summer that we just had and the heat that we had. You don't want to be stuck in a little box just sweating it out. You want to be under some tree on a hill catching with some breeze. That's right. And so on and so on, like a million other examples of that, eh?
Well, that's, you know, we spend half the year burning electricity to cool ourselves and the other half burning to warm ourselves. Because the habitat is not designed for the environment, you know. So I think there's some questions around that, like where we come from and what we're doing, and is it inherent things, and you know, that whole concept of I understand I remember watching a movie, and it was set in Europe somewhere, and I forget what it was. It might have been Braveheart or something, or one of them. And the father would tell the son, you know, build a house before you get a wife. You know, like, and that's a common Western kind of ideal. Get yourself set up, and then get married, and then have kids. Like, those kind of ideals in the West, in Western society, that they held for a while. That's understandable if it's gonna be minus 20. If you're gonna go get a partner and you're gonna bring her back or bring him back, and you're gonna have a baby, and you don't want to bring him back to the minus 20 and have nowhere to bring them, you know. You're going to have frozen people, that's all you know. So it makes sense in context, but here it's a different idea.
Really, that's the response to the conversation to be had with the land then, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you will know where to go, what to do when you're having that conversation.
A right relationship with land. 100%. And so it's unbelievable, you know, like, people have lived all over the earth in every environment and climate that there is, you know. Like, you got people in the Arctic Circle, you got people living in the middle of the Sahara Desert, and everything in between those two extremes. And people that live with the land have lived sustainably for thousands of years. So, yeah, it's not as difficult as we think that it is, but it's about going back and asking who we are and what are we doing here on the planet.
Yeah.
In Tyson Yunkaporta's Sand Talk book, he wrote a bit about the adolescence of Western and industrial culture, you know, and for that culture, that perspective, to be asking for help, basically, asking for guidance right now, because there's a lot of messes, in this world that have come from that perspective. Is that something that you get to experience when you're doing the Banaam courses with people and that kind of, that feeling?
Yeah, if people find it difficult, depending on different client space and different workplaces and whatever, some people find it difficult to relate it to that area, but they can always relate it to their families. And a powerful story for me was when we walked one of our cultural trails, and we were on a bit of a journey with the young men from our community at the time, and it was a pretty interesting time. And we walked for 3 days along the coast and along a cultural trail, and shared a lot of knowledge that had been shared to us from our old people with the younger fellas. And one of the nights over that 3 days walk, we sat around and we shared a lot of this knowledge around the fire with the younger men in particular. And then the next day, I still remember it, we shared the concept of Banaam and Gogon and how you're supposed to support one another and how that works. And it was a father and a son that were paddling we were actually paddling then in a canoe that day across one of the lakes, and one of the young fellas, it was the first time that he actually learnt that knowledge of Banaam and Gogon, and his father was sitting in the back and he was saying, "You're Gogon, you're steering this boat, you got the knowledge for steering." He's saying, "You're Gogon, I'm Banaam, I'm just supporting you." And so, I guess when it comes to that whole dynamic and the young fellas coming through in our community, it's as simple as that. The Banaam and Gogon principle rings true with that. But I don't know if you got anything to add with that stuff, Kyle?
Yeah, no, I think when you look at the Western society and see that idea around adolescence that they're going through, I think that's good on one level. Yeah, that's completely understandable, and I always come back to Banaam and Gogon in that, like, if we based our relationship as the Aboriginal community with the broader community in this country, who was Gogon in 1770? Who was Gogon in that initial colonisation of this country? And in understanding of Gogon Banaam, the person who has the knowledge of this place would be considered a Gogon. What was Gogon's role? Look after the Banaam that was coming here. But when somebody comes in and assumes the role of Gogon from the outset, then when you're a Banaam and you're trying to be a Gogon, we've got a word for that in our language called muggle. And muggle means going the wrong way on the circle. You're trying to take responsibility for something that you don't have knowledge for, or you're trying to shirk that responsibility. That's when we sort of look at that relationship between who is Gogon for this country, and old people that have carried the knowledge of this place sustainably for thousands of years. The oldest continuous living culture. When you've been doing it for that long, you learn a few things. So, I think recognising that and understanding that there is another way, and lots of First Nations people and around the globe have held knowledge for a long time, and I think those systems and those the knowledge that they've carried, it's not only the right time, it's always the right time to put appropriate systems in place for sustainability for everybody. Like, it's always been the right time, but maybe people are more open to have that conversation now. And I feel like that it's improved in my lifetime. And I've definitely seen the conversation start to happen more. And, considering where we are, I think that's at this point, nobody dreamed of having our borders locked down because of a pandemic in this country. I wouldn't have been thinking of that a while ago, and a lot of other people wouldn't, but these are the realities that we're facing because of things that have happened and the lifestyle that we're choosing to live at this time.
This episode of Watershed Chats is presented by Patagonia, whose purpose-driven mission is to use business to protect our home planet. Thanks to our sound engineer and musician, Shannon Sol Carroll, and artist-in-residence, Chris Miyashiro. On behalf of myself, Lauren Hill, and my co-host, Dave Rastovich, thanks for listening with us. Learn more at waterpeoplepodcast.com.